It's our pleasure today to have Ashley Bryan with us, and he was born in New York City on July 13th, 1923, and I'm going to ask him to tell us about his experiences with World War II, how you signed up or how you were drafted, and you just kind of tell us your story. You can go right ahead.
I was at the Cooper Union School of Art and Engineering, and we were very active in the school 1940, 41, 42, doing all the work we could to help the war effort, getting books for the soldiers, victory war bonds, painting murals and all. Well, in my third year at the Cooper Union, I was just 19, I was drafted into the Second World War, and I was drafted into the Transportation Corps, a port battalion. Now, at that time, it was a segregated army, and most of the blacks were in service units. And I was in a port battalion, a company of stevedores. I didn't know the first thing about ships, porthole from hatch holes or anything. I had never worked on docks, but at any rate, that was our work. And our training was in Camp Miles Standish in Taunton, Massachusetts. And after the 3 months, during that time, I either alternated between crying and drawing. And at the end of the 3 months of going through all the exercises, they listed ratings. Now, there were fellows in my outfit who had served as stevedores and had worked on docks and knew things about the boats. Well, they rated me as a tech sergeant, and that meant that I had a specific job, which was a winch operator. Now, that's what brings the cargo up out of the hole, or else helps get it off when it's brought up out of the hole, and then the other winch operator will take that load and deposit it offshore, off the boat side. Well, that was my job. I was operating. Well, I didn't know the first thing about any of that kind of thing. I was terrified of any kind of machines, as it was, and so the fellows all would push me aside and say, "You go ahead and draw," because I always had my drawing materials. And I always made the work harder for them because I didn't work into the rhythm with which they worked. At any rate, we worked after the basic training. We were then stationed in Boston, and we worked the docks in Boston. And during that time, I very rarely touched the winch because the other fellows were so able, they always took over. It was only when we were on the ships going abroad, when we were going off to Europe, that they stated, every man will take on the job to which he was rated assigned. Well, anyway, when we got to Europe, we were at the ports in Glasgow, in Scotland. Well, during that time, I discovered the Glasgow School of Art and the tremendous architecture of the architect that had built that school, and I was so excited about it. I went to the battalion commander and got permission to attend the art school. And I did this because, you see, we had mainly white officers, white Southern officers, who were always restricting us. They were supposed to know how to handle black people. So we were always under very difficult things to face in this so-called, community of service for the war effort, and yet to being always restricted from going out because black soldiers had a great entry with people in the communities. They never showed off who they were. And so they were always taken in a very friendly way. Well, since we were always being restricted, I went to the battalion commander, Colonel Pierce, I'll never forget him, and he gave me permission to attend the Glasgow School of Art while we were there. Now, we worked the docks, but after the work of the day, I would get dressed to go out. And the fellow would say, "But Ashley, we're restricted. You can't go out." I said, "I have permission from the battalion commander." And they all always thought I was putting something over on the officers. They never took it out against me. They were so proud that I could always get away with this. So off I'd go to the art school. I'd go to the commander and says, "You can't go out, we're restricted." I said, "I have permission from the battalion commander." And so that was how it worked. And I attended the Glasgow Art School. I met wonderful people. They invited me to their homes. They invited me to special programs. I remember once was I invited to the opera. And I went to the opera with the students from the school. And there, as I said, I looked across the way, and there in one of the boxes was officers from my company. I made myself very small because I said I was going to the art school. Well, it continued our work on the docks in Glasgow. And then we didn't know what was going to come up. But we entered into a fleet that was on its way at a break in the weather. It was in June, on our way to, it turned out to be, the beaches of Normandy, Omaha Beach. And when we got into this area, this was the area of the landing, the invasion. Now, it was not expected to have a major landing at a beach port. It had to be a major port because of all the cargo that was necessary to back up an invading army. Well, the amphibious duck was a surprise weapon. They had developed this amphibious duck, which was a boat in the water, but a truck on land. And so that was the device that they had invented. Now, with the amphibious duck, at first it took the soldiers who were getting ashore to get a foothold and to gain an access to the beach to go beyond. And if you've seen any of the films, you see the tremendous loss of life that was involved in the invasion. But they were able, with that loss of life, to keep persisting and gradually to get past the mines of the beach, to get past the turrets where you had all of the towers, which it all had been constructed to hold off against any intruders, you see. And so these soldiers had to get past all of this, and they did get the foothold. They went beyond. And so it was about the third day or so, when that had been assured, we began unloading our cargo onto these ducks, and then it was taken to follow up the invading army. And it was then, after 2 or 3 days, that we went ashore to dig foxholes. They had a general mine sweep, but it was very irregular. So in walking, you might step on a mine, you might dig your foxhole, and you dig into a mine. But that was the score. But that's what war is. There is nothing that is considerate in any way, and you just reach a point where you say you live or you die, and you just go ahead. And so it was like that. Well, we dug into our foxholes, and then each day we would go off and unload the ships that were coming with the cargo. And this unloading of the ships continued until the beach finally closed down. Now, in those first days of the weeks of the invasion, every night the planes would come over, the bombing and the strafing. The Allies had set up these barrage balloons, which were supposed to deflect the direction, so to camouflage in a way, or to make it difficult to see directly where people were billeted. But they knew we were along the beaches there, and there was much loss of life of just people digging into foxholes or walking, stepping on mines. I was fortunate in that I made it through that. At a certain point then in the year, the beach closed down. Now, it had been said that any of the forces involved in the invasion would be sent off to rest camps in the Riviera, in southern France. That never happened for us. When the beach closed down, they had us out shoveling the mud of the roads. And I went to my commanding officer of my company and said, you know, when we were working, unloading the ships, occasionally there was bad days, bad weather, and I could give my time to drawing. And I say, now with this shoveling every day, I don't get a chance to develop in my art. They're like, this is war, this is war! But I left a whole set of my drawings there, and then I got permission to have a day off to do my artwork. Now, I don't know how this came about, because it was the same officers of the company, but I remember when the fellows were going off, and I was sitting there, and they would wink at me. They always supported me. I was so unlike the fellows. I was not, but I respected them. I respected what they could do. So there was never anything of their taking it out on me. I was felt to be one of them. I would help them with letters that they were writing. I was always drawing from them. When I'd come in, after work, they'd just fall right out. I'd get my sketch pad and I'd be drawing. I always had my sketch pad in my gas mask. And whenever I had an opportunity, I would take out that pad and I would draw. So I recorded everything from arriving on the beach, of the bombing, the strafing, of the barrage balloons. I recorded the fellows climbing over the boat into the amphibious dock, digging the foxholes and all of that. All of these I was always drawing. And in fact, It was sometime later when we left the beach for Le Havre. Now that was where you really saw what war meant. The tremendous bombing, the destruction of everything, the hunger of people, hanging around the camps to just get to the garbage pails. The GIs would just dump food, you know, they get so, and they would get other things from the black market and all that would be so common in those times. But the people, when we were taking those cans of garbage to a dump, the people would run after the truck and jump on the truck and try and get to the food before it was dumped, where the people would be waiting as well. So that told you really very clearly what it was like. Now, we then, after the war, would do things like that of working in these places. And at one point, we even were in charge of prisoners of war. And the striking thing was seeing how much better they were being treated than we were, the prisoners of war, the demands they were making as well. At any rate, at one point, we then moved to a place from the Le Havre to Rouen. And there again, the ruins, the cathedral, and everything. And always that kind of experience, you see. Not only the hunger and sufferings of the people, but the destruction of everything that was cultural, that they had created and lived with. And so the war ended after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That was a real wake-up of how destructive man could be. And it was at that point that it really shook up people in thinking about what is life, what do we have, what can I hold on to? And I know when I came home, there were people who were trying to find some way to establish something sure and get a feeling of what was creative and constructive. When I came to the Cranberry Isles in the late 40s, there was a couple and they were building their own house out of the stones and whatever timber they got. One had been a conscientious objector and worked in the medical series, and his wife. And they were building this house, and we all pitched in to help, but it was a desire to create something. On one of those small islands, there was also a couple who had been an architect and his wife, and they had left the world. They lived on this island, they had a signal flag for any of their needs, but there was that experience after the war of people being so affected by what nuclear war meant, you know, the atomic bombs, that it meant that if you did not live in the day, there's nothing more. Well, that's an important message anyway, to create as much as you can in the time now, because nothing else is guaranteed. It never was. But certainly with the destructiveness that was now in man's hands, and the way things get out of hand, you were also more concerned to be focused in what you would do. Well, I came back from the war, and I was fortunate in a way because we did not come back as a unit. It was a segregated time, they did not have enough places on any of the Liberty ships going home for our company. We were broken down into small groups and we filtered home, little by little, because they did not have enough room for the segregated army provisions or so. So we came home in 3s and 4s and things like that, and came home. Well, I came home to the Cooper Union to complete my artwork. Now, I completed the artwork there in 1946 when I came home, and it was that very year that an art school, the Skowhegan School of Art, was founded in Maine. Okay. Now, when I came home, I was so spun around, but I had the good fortune of the support of family and friends. So I went back to the Cooper Union, completed the work in a half year. But I knew I could not go on with art. I had to try to find answers to the questions of why man chooses war, when we know through the history of what war it leads to, so much further prolonged enmities. So I said, oh, maybe I'll study philosophy and I will get answers. So I used my GI Bill at Columbia University, enrolled at Columbia as an undergraduate in philosophy to work through that. Well, as I started the work in philosophy, I was really intrigued with the way man builds systems of thought and tries to create foundations which have no chinks in them or so, but they always will have something in them. Systems of thought in ethics, in aesthetics, in political thought, all of this. I was caught up in it. But what I would do, I'd have my sketch pad, and I would make sketches through the school year, reading and writing. But summers, I had discovered the Cranberry Isles from that year at Skowhegan, and the Maine students found a place on the Cranberry Isles. I went to the Cranberry Isles, and I would draw and paint all summer. Then I was back to Columbia for the next year, and I stayed with it till I completed the work. But I knew then that I now had to spend my day painting. And if I stayed home, I would have to give it what we call the 2 8-hour days. One to earn my bread, the other to keep growing as an artist. In the fine arts, that is the score. There are areas in the arts where you can earn a good living, whether you're working in film work, in theater, in fashion, in costume, and all of these, in graphic design. But in the fine arts, if you're painting, if you're drawing, you're doing sculpture, you're writing poetry, you're doing choreography, you're composing music, you must have 2 8-hour days. And the professor explained that to us, not to scare us, but to say, not literally, but keep your hand in, no matter what. Have a sketch pad, make a little note, and keep going. So that's what I was doing all through the Cooper Union, the Columbia time. But at the end of Columbia, I didn't wait to see if I'd passed the course or not. I simply got on a boat, used my GI Bill abroad. And where did I go? I went to Aix-en-Provence in southern France, the Cézanne country. And there I was painting and drawing. It was in the area of Mont Saint-Victoire, the Barrage Zola. And I spent the time drawing and painting, hoping to get a grasp of what art meant to me. And it was at that time, 1950, that the great cellist, one of the greatest instrumentalists of the world, Pablo Casals, who had laid down his bow after the war, when Franco regime came in, he said the Allies had helped him, he refused to concertize. And it was an anniversary of the death of Bach that he began. So it was during that time that I went to the first festival in Prades. It was in the area of Catalan language, right across from Barcelona, where he grew up. And it was held in a cathedral in this town, no hotels, but this incredible Rook early cathedral. And so the great instrumentalists, Eugene Isterman, Alexander Schneider, Clara Haskell, John Verma, all the Jenny Turrell and Horshovsky, they were all came to play with this great instrumentalist. So that came out of the war for me, this need to have some input to counteract experiences which have nothing to do with my nature. And the reason that the veterans have such a hard time is most of what they are going through is not in terms of their nature, of being a human being and respecting others. It's in terms of learning how to defend yourself and to kill. And so with that kind of training that's persistent, you'll get a whole other view of things. And without support, it's hard to counteract it. And that's why, as I say, it's not unusual that you have the statistics that a third of the homeless are veterans, you know, because out of their experiences where they need help, it's very hard to get a consistent help to move them past their problems, you see. I was fortunate in that I've been drawing, and I am drawing and painting to this day, and I've been having a great time with the Fairhope Library, meeting with children by the hundreds, and sharing my love of poetry and African folk tales and the Black American poets with them. And so I don't know how much my war things add into any of this, but it was a matter of really living past those experiences, never forgetting them, but moving past them in a way that I would like to be constructive and creative in my life, and not destructive, and not to think of ways of protecting myself against the evil of others, but reaching out for the good in others and supporting that through what I do.
That's
Thank you
beautiful.
for the time.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. That's great.